Welcome, welcome very, very much to Conversation. A pleasure to welcome to the program John Bradin. He's a newly minted member of the community here, relatively so. He's been here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network and Public Access Television. He's a person of a very, very what is called well-read person. He's read a great deal. We'll find out about that as we talk about his life. And he's also got an interesting family background. And he's a new member of the public access system here at Manhattan Neighborhood Network. He has a show called the
Voice Salon.
Public Voice Salon,
Yes.
which is a treat to tune in. He's always talking with people of great interest and great understanding and concern for the human condition in a very interesting way, a major contribution to the programming schedule here at MNN. And John, welcome so much to Conversation. Great to see you. Welcome to the set.
Thank you, Harold. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Share your background a little bit, your family background. We were reminiscing before camera that
Yes.
you've got some roots to the Anglo Isle and that kind of stuff. But
Oh, yes. Well, my grandmother was born in London,
hmm
and at the age of 7, she was brought to America by a famous actress named Blanche Walsh.
Oh yes, I have known. Yeah,
Blanche Walsh, she did very serious parts. She was known as the American Sarah Bernhardt.
Wow, you mean Blanche Walsh?
Blanche Walsh.
Was yeah.
Blanche Walsh, yeah.
And she was brought. Your mother was brought by
my
her.
grandmother never knew her dad. Her dad took off when she was born.
That happened.
She
yeah.
was being raised by a single mother working as a chambermaid in a hotel in London.
Wow.
Where this famous actress would stay when she was in London. And so she befriended this famous actress. My grandmother's mother did. And so one day Blanche Walsh said, "How would you like to come to New York and be my wardrobe lady?" So she said, "Yeah, that would be great."
Sure.
She
New York.
came into New York and they were unpacking the trunk and a picture of a little girl fell out. And this actress looked and said, "Who's that lovely child?" And my grandmother's mother said, "That's my daughter. I didn't think I could bring her. I put her in a boarding home." Well, you can't leave. We'll send for exactly. That's what she said. That's what she said right away. So she came across on the American Starliner.
God, this should be a movie.
It's
Who
like a
could
movie.
do it?
It's
Who could direct? I don't know. Yeah.
Absolutely better than the Titanic.
Yeah, right.
Better than the
right,
Titanic.
right.
Because it's true. This is
Yeah.
all true. She came
Right.
up the Hudson River in on this ocean liner, pulled into the dock in the Hudson River on the Upper West Side. A limousine was waiting
Wow.
to take her to Blanche Walsh's Park Avenue duplex.
Yeah.
And that ushered my grandmother into this world of theater.
Yeah.
You know,
Right,
and this was the Belle Epoque period, you know. I'm
Oh,
reading
Belle Epoque.
Belle Epoque, this is the late 1890s, early
Okay, yeah.
1910s, right? That
Magic
period
Lantern coming
of
in.
time.
Yeah, you're going.
So the theater part was with Blanche Walsh, who played in Shakespeare. She played in she did a drama called Trilby, which was a very big hit at the turn of the century.
Right.
And that's where we get the word Svengali from
Really?
from the Trilby play, which Trilby was a precursor to Phantom of the Opera.
Oh.
Right? Now Phantom of the Opera is now
Svengali was
Svengali
was a conjurer. I thought it was Russia, but
he was a hypnotist.
a hypnotist. Yeah.
He was
yeah.
Svengali. The story of Trilby is about a young gal who is very beautiful, and she works as an artist's model and as a laundress, but she dreams of being a singer, only she can't sing.
Outside of that, there's
She can't.
she got all the talent outside of that.
She
Yeah.
could not hold a note until she meets Svengali,
Ah.
who's an older man who's a hypnotist, who puts her under a spell, convinces her that she could sing, and voila, she becomes the world-famous star.
Motivational speaker.
Exactly.
Yeah, right.
This play caught the imagination of the public.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. There were lines and crowds of people around the block whenever it was performed.
This would be in the
This was
10s.
1903, around that time, yeah. And actually what happened...
George M. Cohen on the stand?
I don't know. But there's a town in Florida. If you go to Florida, there's a town called Trilby.
Oh, really?
That a railroad magnate named the town because he said, I have seen a heroine in a drama who I'm so enchanted with that I've decided to name this
I'll be
town.
darned, yeah.
Toulouse-Lautrec, who was a French artist,
Yeah, amazing artist. Yeah.
named his yacht Trilby.
I'll be darned.
and there were little tchotchkes that were for sale.
Yeah, right.
Trilby fever swept the world at
I'll
that
be
time.
damned.
So
Okay.
the star of that play was Blanche Walsh.
Wow.
She was also in a play version of a Tolstoy novel called Resurrection,
Okay.
which is one of Tolstoy's big three. Big three. People don't know about, they've forgotten about Resurrection.
Yeah,
that
right.
was his last novel. It came out in 1899. He hadn't written in over a decade, and it was based on a true story. The reason he wrote this book was because he wanted to raise money for a group called the Dukkabors, which was a spiritual pacifist group. They were being persecuted by the Tsar. They needed to get out of Russia. So they came to Tolstoy because Tolstoy was a pacifist.
Yeah.
And he wrote this book to raise money for the Dukkabors.
Okay.
And he actually went out and got a copyright because he had renounced his copyright, and he considered all of his books for the good of humanity, and so that he didn't.
Idealist.
He was a very idealistic guy. My wife and I are making a movie about Tolstoy.
No fooling. Boy, you really got a lot of irons in the fire.
We're filmmakers now.
Yeah, right.
My wife Claudia, you know Claudia.
Yeah, of course,
she spends
yeah.
a lot
Not
of time.
real well, but I do know her, and I know you work together. That's beautiful.
I always have to give a shout out to my beautiful wife Claudia, who
Absolutely,
without her, I could not have
I don't think
produced
you'd have anything going
the
if
kind
it
of
wasn't
work
for Claudia.
that I've
Do
been
you?
doing.
I don't think
No.
you could do anything. You couldn't.
She's
She knows how to make computers work and all that stuff, leaving you free to do all your creative stuff.
and
What a lucky fellow you are.
I
Do
am
you
so
appreciate how lucky
yes,
you are in Claudia?
Absolutely, Claudia. I love
Yeah.
you. You know I appreciate you, and she's allowed me also to write.
You
So-
are a writer. Yeah, we got to move along, brother, because we're in television
Yes.
and there's this tyranny of time.
I know.
Because I know you're a student of, and you've been teaching literature, and you've done degrees in literature and so forth. Let's move through, and then
Yes.
your immediate family setting, and then
Yes.
let's get down to the work you're doing now and let them know about the work that you're up to now, particularly focusing, if we could, somewhat on this idea of public access or communication, multimedia communication to the water world society, which we're all both interested in.
Well, I'm gonna start with. It's a lot of stuff, Harold. Let me start with my book. How about my new book?
Yeah,
This
okay.
is called The Ethical Sales Agent.
Yeah, sure. Maybe you can come in and try.
And-
Hold it for a
okay,
minute. You
this
might
is,
be able, or let
okay.
me to hold it.
It's
Okay,
it's
you can come in. Turn it. There you go. Get it
all right,
straight. Make sure you get rid
it's
of the.
a blue cover.
There you go, Ed.
A plain
The
cover.
ethical- be careful of the
So you-
light. There.
okay,
The
there we
ethical
go,
sales
there we go.
agent, a transformative sales pedagogy to liberate corporate culture. Liberate cultural corporate.
Yes, corporate
culture, and save America. Not a small matter.
Okay, that's all.
But it's worth a weekend's work.
We're gonna try.
Putting it out. Now, what's the book about?
Well, it's about transforming the corporate culture so that there is an ethos of kindness and caring infused into the business practices. As it is now, we have a bottom line, Harold, that only cares about maximizing profits.
Has it always been like that, or was there a golden age where there was some real caring and ethics like you're trying to introduce?
Well, there was always experiments done. You know, there was a time when Kellogg's, which makes cereal, they fooled around with a 30-hour work week back in the 1930s when there was a movement to have a shorter work week that was winding its way through Congress. And I think it passed the Congress, but the Senate vetoed it, and it almost went through. But Kellogg's decided on their own to have a shorter work week so that their workers would be happier, would have more time with their families and their communities. And as it turned out, the productivity actually went up. And they kept that system for decades until just a couple of years ago they actually went back to a 40-hour, official 40-hour. But I think what's happening in our business world—
They had to fight to get a 40-hour week. Over the longer haul. But go ahead.
That was a struggle, you know, to do that in our labor.
What I think I'm getting at is the iron-clad law of or hand of authoritarianism has been very much a part of the business culture for a very long time. It seems to me, by people maximizing profits by exploiting the labor of the poor laboring wage slaves. It seems to me it's been characteristic of the economy most all of the time.
Absolutely, you know, and we really need to change it now more than ever. And there is starting to be an awareness of the need to have a shift here. And you have, for example, a book came out last year by John Mackey, who is the CEO of Whole Foods, and he wrote a book called Conscious Capitalism.
Okay.
So there's a movement towards a more kinder, caring perception of the corporate world, that you can make money and make the world a better place at the same time.
Could you call it, what do you call it?
Conscious capitalism.
Could you call it conscientious capitalism?
I guess you could have.
CCC?
The CCC.
Wasn't there a CCC back in the 30s?
Franklin Roosevelt.
Yes,
with
right.
the alphabet soup programs.
And conscientious as well as conscious. You can be conscious of a work camp.
But we need more consciousness out there. We
consciousness.
Need an elevation of consciousness.
Yeah.
You know? So now we talked about Richard Wolff, who's an economist.
He's a very clever, very erudite fellow. Yeah.
Incredible. I think he's probably easily, one of the most important economists of our time.
Mm-hmm.
The way he gives an analysis of what needs to happen.
And we're blessed to have with Malik, our producer, who helps and so forth, him becoming a member of the faculty here at MNN in terms of public educational fare that they're offering, which is important increasingly, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
Rick Wolff, was a guest on our show recently.
Yes, he was.
I'm so happy that was incredible to get that lecture.
It was a very informative hour that you had, and you were magnificent in your interlocutor role, yeah.
Thank you, Harold.
Yeah,
Thank you. But also that he was also on the Charlie Rose show, and he got on the Bill Moyers show. So he's able to get out to a larger audience.
I've seen him wow for a number of times at the Ethical Culture Center in the big room with a big auditorium with Amy Goodman and Naomi Klein and some really other major figures in terms of alternate media, and wow them with his oratory. And he presented this thing the other day as a professor in a very disciplined and very it was a lecture, but it was very, very informative, well thought out, well timed, well put together. A great contribution to the fair on Manhattan Neighborhood Network. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
But also, the thing, Rick Wolff's book is called, his new book is called Democracy at Work, A Cure for Capitalism. And his thesis is that workplaces have to be democratized, that the most tyrannical place in our society now, ironically, is the workplace.
More than the school?
Well, I think they're sort of,
the
they
school
tie
is
in.
a training ground for it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Well, you did teach for a while.
I am a teacher.
Were you a Simon Legree, or were you a? Well, we want to get to that. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, it's interesting because walking here today, I took the Uptown A train.
Yeah.
I got off of 59th Street and walked past Fordham University at Lincoln Center.
Fordham Law School is right there, sure.
A seminal place for me in my growth as an intellectual because I majored in English.
Okay.
And I got my degree in 1994 with a minor in business and history.
That's interesting.
So I want to cover, to have some smattering of business knowledge, but my focus was on literature.
What made you interested in business at all?
Because out of practicality, people you want to try to make a living at some point, and there's a realization of the whole money issue, okay? I think that's why most people do major in business.
I thought about this with other people in conversation, and I'm thinking of the whole human condition and so forth. And there are lots of characteristics of human consciousness and interaction among fellow members of the species and other species as well. But it would seem to me that in terms of the world today, if it's always been, I don't know, it would be in different forms, but the major force for understanding the human society is overwhelmingly, it seems to me, unfortunately perhaps, and to be changed, but it is at this time is money. Money seems to be the main thing. I don't know what else. There are things like love and empathy and concern and all these other kinds of empathetic considerations and so forth. But it seems to be the major thing that motivates human society and the individuals is the getting of, securing of, and gaining more of money in an inordinate kind of way. I don't know. That's called practicality. What do you think of all that?
Well, I think that it's true, and I think it needs to change.
Do you think it's always been like that? Is it evolutionarily built into evolutionary process?
I think that if you have to look at the history of capitalism to answer that correctly.
Only capitalism, not only the species or origin of species or the means of survival of the fittest or some sort of metaphor that would tie into it. You know, I'm trying to see it in a larger context. That outer directed kind of thing that one goes after in order to gain security. Mr. Marx said, from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. But what about also reasonable wants, or even then on to unreasonable wants that is motivating human behavior? Is it that gainful attitude toward the economy that is called practical and responsible, been able to inveigle itself into human conscious and ethical practice and thought? Or where does it stand? I mean, I'm sorry, I just rambled on, but you understand what I mean?
That's okay. Well, you were friends with Buckminster Fuller.
No, that's too strong to say I was friends.
Or
I was
you
a
were-
great admirer. I
Okay,
met him a couple of times and did a program with him.
Sure,
and I don't know of any man who had it more, as the kids would say, or now we're kids, they're adults, had it together in terms of understanding the human condition within an evolutionary and universal context. Best mind in the history of the world, including Mr. Einstein. You know, in my humble opinion. So, yeah, he's a major figure and inspiration to me, and to much of the intellectual community that thinks systems are comprehensively. It would seem to me,
So it's a great honor to be with you, Harold, who comes out of that tradition, that we can put some of these things into context here.
Yeah, but we started talking about you minored in business.
The
Why did you bother with business when you could have been writing another great American novel? In a garret somewhere with your hands heated over the candle giving you light, you know. You know what I'm saying, right?
I know what you're saying, Harold, and I have those bohemian and creative capacities and inclinations. I was an English major, but I won the English award when I was in 8th grade.
Congratulations!
Thank you.
That's bar mitzvah time.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was writing when I was a kid. The first short story I wrote was called The Horse Player. It was about my Uncle Allie, who was a Damon Runyon character.
Love Damon
from
Runyon.
New York. He used to go to the racetrack. He was friends with Crazy Joey Gallo.
Yeah.
He used to make bets for Crazy Joey. And my Uncle Allie was a black sheep of the family. Always had
God bless them all.
Camel cigarette in his hand. Tip sheet in the other hand. Heading for the racetrack all the time. But I wrote a story about him when I was a kid because there was some life and energy there that I was
like
attracted.
A short story.
It was a short story called The Horse Player. And but also I go back to my grandmother, who was this, nurtured by this famous actress.
Yes, right.
And my grandmother would break into song. If something reminded her, she knew all the songs from the 1920s.
Give my regards to Broadway. Remember me to Harold Square.
She taught me the words to Babyface.
Babyface.
You got the cutest little baby face. There ain't no one who can take your place. Baby face. My poor heart is jumping. You sure have started something, baby face.
Maybe we shouldn't do too much.
Maybe not.
Okay. We might get a better song. Like Roll Out the Barrel or something.
There you go. There you go.
Anyway,
but she had a player piano. She taught me all these songs when I was a kid.
Right.
There was a picture, a photograph, an old sepia-toned photograph of Blanche Walsh on the stage. So, and my grandmother also had an art gallery on her back porch, dedicated to her grandkids. So any of her grandkids who made a coloring with crayons or magic markers, their creation would go up on the wall automatically.
Right.
There was no being graded or judged, and so that was my school. That was my early education.
Yeah. Well, that's great. That's my theater
absorbing
and music.
all that theatricality. Now, my dad picked up on the acting bug because he was in a play. He was in a couple of plays in the late 1950s at a place called the North Jersey Playhouse.
Okay.
Which was produced by Robert Ludlum. He was Robert Ludlum
author.
Became a writer later on.
Really, yeah.
And my dad remembers him saying, one of these days I'm going to write a book. He went on and he wrote a lot of books, and most of them went to #1 on the New York Times, bestsellers.
Right.
And they were Russian spy, intrigue, Cold War thrillers.
Absolutely.
They're making movies out of them
now.
now.
Right. Those books do become the source of a movie.
Matt Damon is starring in the Jason Bourne series. Based on those novels. So
I think the world's galloping toward multimedia, away from the linear perceptions of print. You think we used to visit with Marshall McLuhan every spring.
Oh, yeah.
68 to 71, Oracle of the Electronic Age.
Yes,
brilliant man.
yes.
Brilliant man. Never could get Hamish, as they say in Yiddish, with him, but he would let us sit in the class. But he said that we're entering the electronic age, and we're now in multimedia. Do you think the world is getting... And I see where bookstores are closing, and literacy, they're taking books off the shelf and getting rid of them because nobody's reading anymore. Everybody's doing things multimedia, it seems. What do you think of that trend? And you're making a transition yourself from literature, God bless it all, but to multimedia. Maybe we could get into that because we're talking about public access this week on Conversation. So, sorry, I didn't mean to send you. One of the problems is tyranny of time. We've got so much time.
I know.
We could talk 25 minutes and sing songs for 30.
Well, Harold, this is why Conversation is so important. I love the name of your show, Conversations with Harold Channer, and I believe in the importance of dialogue and salons. That's why
the song Gertrude Stein.
I'm trying to revive that. However I can. I created an open discussion in a bookstore in Hoboken.
I've seen so many of those programs. Great people.
Roundtables.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, community roundtables. So I think a lot of it for me is my interest in human dialogue.
Yes, right.
And discourse and the connection between thinking and speaking. There's a Russian psychologist named Lev Vygotsky.
I don't know.
Yeah, he made that link, the connection between. He was from the 1930s period and he, so I think to me the idea of communication, of language, of discourse, we're losing that now because people are not enriching themselves in the humanities. They're not studying literature. So the human emotions are becoming duller because of this mechanistic type of education, which is majoring in marketing and business and technology.
That's back to the money.
And we'll lose It's
by and large.
Absolutely.
It's a mark of insecurity.
There's a dehumanization process going on in the society. And one thing about all my projects that you could say is a theme, it's about rehumanization. We need to rehumanize in multiple spaces in the education system. We need to get back to core subjects like philosophy and literature and art. And I think the whole education system has to be restructured and away from this emphasis on standardized testing. Bill Gates, all due respect for Bill Gates, he's great when it comes to computers, but he has become the de facto Secretary of Education of our country.
That's interesting.
He's become so well respected. People, any time they talk about education, they put Bill Gates on TV and says, this is what we need to do, and blah, 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 blah.
Well, thank you. I haven't seen that much of him contributing to that.
He's always on the Sunday morning talk shows.
Well, he might be on Sunday morning talk about health things. He's taking interest in health. He got a lot of money from winning out in the sweepstakes for Microsoft and everything. He's got a lot of money, and he's contributed. And the whole exponential increasing of bandwidth and cable and communications is growing all the time, so he made many contributions that way. But I don't remember him. They have these TED Talks, which he's very much behind, where you got technology, science, and that kind of thing, mathematics encouraged along algorithmic writing and doing all these kind of things. But as far as intellectual understanding, I don't see him very relevantly placed anywhere other than that he can give some more money to some good cause or something. But I don't know what his contribution is beyond running Microsoft, which is huge. It's a corporate thing, and he's passed that over now.
He's one of the architects of the Common Core curriculum.
Common Core. What is that?
Common Core is what the Obama administration is pushing. George Bush had No Child Left Behind. No. Obama has Common Core.
What is that? Science and stuff?
They're emphasizing
math and science.
They're emphasizing math and science. Not that that's not important, but they're de-emphasizing the humanities. They're de-emphasizing, they're cutting out the arts, they're cutting out literature.
Okay, go ahead.
This is what's going on, Harold.
Well, I see them trying to encourage math, science, and electronics or something. They're trying to encourage that because that's what that feeds the information technology and the robotics that are coming, and have a bottom line thing where you can make an entrepreneurial contribution and make a lot of money and improve society.
So
but the humanities are sort of just an afterthought in those. I mean, this seems to me. I think we ought to be freed up from having to be concerned with all those practical concerns, to be involved with what's called the goods of civilization, which are the arts and the humanities and the things that are needed. They're being overlooked. They don't count because you can't make a buck at it. You ever try to make your way as an artist outside of some institution that gives you some sort of a certificate that gives you permission to talk to other people and make money at it, as a teacher or something? It's all about money, 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 money only, it seems to me, almost without exception. And the artists are still dying in the gutter and writing their great novel up in the garret.
Okay, there is the world of what is, and then there's the world of what might be. And I think it's important not to get stuck in the way things are. This table that our water is on is fixed. It's not going to change. But human beings are malleable. We can become different. We can grow. We can change. Societies can also grow and change because they're made up of human beings. So I think one of the reasons I created this ethical business society is to create money for good causes and to use money also strategically to help to change the world and to resist the right-wing hegemony which has been growing since the 1930s.
Don't you see how big Bill Gates could say the same thing?
As far as?
As what you just said. I want to get this so I can make good causes to make the world better and everything like that and improve the world. That same thing, that thing that you put out for your own mission, would probably be able to be said out of the words of Bill Gates, truthfully to his own conscience and consciousness. Or to a businessman.
It really takes a longer conversation than we could even have here.
Right.
It would take a lecture, but I would have to give a lecture to give. But let me go back to 1930.
No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
1934, during the New Deal period, when Roosevelt was in power, and there was basically an understanding that we need to do something for the poor. You have to have Social Security and all that. There was a small group of radical right-wing businessmen headed by the DuPonts who created an organization called the American Liberty League. And they were going to use their resources as a think tank for propagandizing
against Roosevelt?
Against Roosevelt, against the New Deal, and for this idea of free market fundamentalism.
Well, that's called Tea Party and whatnot now.
But it's part of a trend.
Yeah, okay,
right.
There's always been retrogression.
Now, here's another interesting connection to my biography, Harold, okay? The person who started that organization, his name was Irene DuPont.
Okay.
His daughter married my grandfather's cousin.
That's where you get all this.
So, because they did something. I feel like I'm taking care of some family business here. That I had this wayward faction of my family that sort of went astray.
It became successful.
Well, I'm not going to.
I mean, the uncle is one guy more interesting to me.
The uncle, the Damon Runyon, but the other side is the DuPonts.
Yeah, that's a pretty big gap there, pal.
But here's the thing about the DuPonts, about Irene DuPont and this American Liberty League. At least they had the courage of their convictions, and they felt that the society was going in the wrong way, and they were businessmen.
Yeah.
And they said, we're going to be political bullsmen and fight for what we believe in.
Yeah, right.
Now, I challenge the progressives out there, and I want to lead this. Okay?
Yeah.
That's why I wrote this book, The Ethical Sales Agent.
Okay.
I'm trying to create a counter-movement to this right-wing hegemony, which has now settled in. And it's the oxygen we breathe.
Yeah.
People don't question this.
That's the thing that I talked about money.
It's the free market. You can't have regulations. Regulations are bad.
Yeah.
I have a button that says tax the rich.
I saw you as you wore it prominently as
I
you
wore it on my.
streets.
You know why? Do you know who gave me that button?
No.
I'll tell you who gave it to me. Frances Golden. Do you know who Frances Golden is?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, let me tell you who she is.
Fill me in.
Frances Golden is a literary agent, founder of Frances Golden Literary Agency.
Okay.
She's very much a progressive left person. She says that her literary agency is only interested in books that will change the world.
Huh.
Now, some of her clients, Adrienne Rich, who was a great poet,
Okay.
20th century woman poet, was
Yeah.
one of her clients.
Yeah.
Barbara Kingsolver is one of her clients. Barbara Kingsolver is an American novelist
Okay.
who lives on a farm in Virginia, and she's a biologist also, and
Right.
she's into environmentalism,
Yeah.
and she considers herself a novelist and a social activist.
That's starting to emerge.
she
now.
works that-
environmentalism is.
that-
Yeah. Rachel Carlson got it started, but anyway,
Rachel
yeah,
Car-
yeah.
So now,
Carson.
Frances Golden has a new book out,
Yeah.
which she edited, and it's called Imagine Living in a Socialist USA.
Okay. Yeah.
And Rick
okay.
Wolf is one of the contributors of
Okay.
that book. Now, originally, she was going to go with a small publisher because all the small presses were clamoring to put this book out.
Okay.
But she felt that it needed a bigger corporate publisher to get out into the world
Right.
more.
Well,
So
if you-
she approached HarperCollins.
That's pretty big. Yeah.
And HarperCollins said no.
Okay.
And she came back and she said, "How dare you?"
She
turn me
came back
down.
to them. You mean.
She came back to them, and she was very passionate about this cause and the need for a larger discussion
when
about.
is this going on? What time frame?
Just happened this year.
This year. Okay.
This is
Okay.
a
So it's
brand
current.
new.
Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
so
good. Yeah. Go ahead.
so this is all happening now. So Frances Golden was able to get HarperCollins to publish a book about socialism. Now that to me signals a sea change in the society.
That's very interesting.
That socialism is no longer a dirty word. So let's go back to, is it,
What was it? Lenin said the capitalists will sell us the rope by which we'll hang them.
Right.
So,
well, let's-
I'm not sure if there's a metaphor that fits or not.
But we talked about earlier, I mentioned this
I
book.
mean, they could making money by selling a lot of those books is going to undercut their whole way of life
I mentioned
because they're making a quick profit
yes,
or something. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah.
But I mentioned earlier the book by John Mackey called Conscious Capitalism.
Okay.
So there's a movement to reform capitalism, to make it more humane, to make it more kind and caring. I'm trying to be a part of that and push that forward with my ethical business society. However, if this effort does not succeed, the people who want to abolish capitalism, they're also growing in numbers and strength. See what I'm saying?
I do.
So there's kind of like either it's going to be
The
conscious
people that want to abolish capitalism
are growing in strength, because here's a book about socialism that's just came out. A corporate publisher put out a book on socialism.
Yeah, right.
There is a sea change. People have to wake up and smell the coffee. 60% of the people surveyed in this country, young people, have a favorable opinion of socialism.
Is that
for
right?
the first time in
I
history.
wonder what the trend over time is, and that has been sort of in the closet.
Well,
under Hoover, they really,
I think as capitalism continues to suffer problems, and with the financial crisis and the $17 trillion bailout, and there's a growing gap between the rich and the poor.
That is happening.
It's getting more and more pronounced. So there is a growing movement to socialize the economy. And in Seattle, a young woman, an Indian woman, was elected to the city council of Seattle, which is another sort of a bellwether that there is a sea change going on. So I think the people who are in the capitalist culture, they better get their acts together quickly and make a change and humanize and create a new bottom line. What I'm calling my radio show, I have a radio show now called New Bottom Line.
Yeah, you just started that.
It's a brand new show. It's on the Gary Null Progressive Radio Network.
Oh, he has a radio network.
Gary Null is one of my...
BAI. BAI is in trouble. I'm really sorry to hear
I know.
that.
He's got BAI. Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame. That's Pacifica, I guess, is in trouble. I don't know, but that's not good. Woody Guthrie would be, singing a song again, that happening, Anyway, I didn't mean, that's really interesting. So you think socialism may be on the march in the Western economy?
I mean,
it's a little hard to see at the moment.
You got a socialist president in France. What does that tell you?
Well, it was French,
right?
French,
Anyway, well, I think to me it's a trend. I mean, are the people going to stand for this inequality? Aren't they going to rise up sooner or later, don't you think?
Seems to me, if I may, just being waxing huge or something like that.
Yeah.
injustice has been the order of the whole of human history. I mean, I don't think there's any period which has been able to be, from the invention of agriculture 8 to 10,000 years ago, you get some sort of surplus capability to have civilization and so forth. You have a small group running everything, and the people are more or less like slaves. Would you want to drag one of those great big stones across the desert of, I mean, I can't see what the incentive would be, but slaves. And then you had, Nebuchadnezzar, you had pharaohs, and then you had Rome, and they were tyrannical to the people. Jesus said, they rose up against him, but they were more or less a few people in control of everything, living lavishly and well, and everybody else wallowing around in the mud. Then you had about 1,000 years of feudalism in Europe after Rome fell, when the king is up and his courtiers are up in the castle eating all kinds of wonderful things, and the peasants are wallowing around in the mud. And then you had, 1776, you get an industrial revolution going. There was a little bit of thing coming up like that, but it's always been a few people run everything, and the masses are just taking whatever leftovers that they deem to allow. So, I mean, it's a pattern that isn't just in this modern day. It's a pattern of human history. James Joyce had Daedalus say history is a nightmare from which we're attempting to awaken. Do you understand? Putting the picture in a larger historical frame is what I'm saying. Yeah. It's always been unjust. That's the norm, right? I mean, there's never been a just society. Maybe, even Aristotle in Rome, in Athens, there was a slave society. I don't mean to rain on your parade or saying that this is particularly grim, but it's been the whole history of mankind has been grim, relevant to what may be emerging, a really just order that's being born now, rather than trying to find something coming out of history that would reflect that. What I'm saying is we may be at a moment of liberation now, at this period. I did a program with Isaac Asimov one time. He wrote all the laws of robotics, and he said we got 10,000 generations. We're a Homo species. We're all out of Africa 10,000, 100,000, 200,000 years ago. 10,000 generations. He said this is the defining, with the capital THE, defining generation now. There's nothing relevant from history that is relevant to the change that's going on now.
What generation was that?
This generation. The generation now, in 1950 to 2050 or something. This period is totally unique in terms of emerging almost beyond political differentiation from history, but you're getting almost onto evolutionary. There are steps up the evolutionary process. So it's a qualitative change that is offering liberation that has never been possible by the ability to provide technologically augmented capability of human consciousness to provide for everybody in a way where there is enough. There's never been enough. It's always been scarce. And we're coming to the end of that. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wax, but I think this is a time of something that is so new that it can't even hardly be grasped. Real, honest-to-God liberation may be at hand. At the same time, the weapons now can wipe out the whole species, which is a further extension. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
We always have to keep that in mind, the nuclear threat and this idea of getting beyond warfare, which you don't hear our leaders talk about. Unfortunately, they seem to feel that warfare is always going to be part of the reality.
Warfare has been the means in which, young man, seems to me, being real, than a little politics. Warfare is the means by which political legitimacy is established. You establish by conquering. You, what they call, win. You win and you conquer a group, and then you co-opt them with your mythic tales and everything like that. And then that's how you get to become what is called politically legitimate, is by force of arms. The kings had knights that would beat people on the head if they did not listen to and the same in Rome, and the same in feudal Europe, the same now. You see, it's always been the force of arms is called realpolitik, or real politics. That's real. That's what really motivates and gives political legitimacy to a particular order that claims political legitimacy or historically politically legitimacy. It still holds, doesn't it? The reason the United States rules is because they got more bombs and more ability to intimidate others and conquer them. The right to conquest is the first rule of international law is the right to conquest.
Well, Harold, I think again, I want to go back to there is what is, and there is what might be, and there is what ought to be.
Thank you.
You have to always keep that in mind, that the past is the past, and we can always start fresh in some way. I think the '60s was about that kind of a new beginning. If you want to look back to a time that was hopeful and radical, it was the 1960s. There was talk about make love, not war. It was everywhere. It was in the consciousness. It was developing.
I think that's what Mr. Asimov was talking about. That was not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. There was something major going on evolutionarily. And one of the things that contention for it, Fuller and some other thinkers, we were actually transcending through extension of our consciousness to make the world other than in Eden-like sense. We were wandering around in the wilderness, eating carrion or staying alive. We were maybe transcending the ironclad laws of scarcity itself. That there's never been enough, so for one to win, another has to lose. Do you understand? We may be transcending scarcity with the exponential increasing ability to provide life support within an ecological context on one hand. So the point is, this is not your normal time. This is a unique time. Now, there's other people thought that, but it may be actually true. And our political leadership is living within and reifying outdated institutions from an era that's been qualitatively transformed in relationship to the future that forms before us. And they don't have any vision of how to get to that new order because the institutions, the thought patterns, the statements of purpose and all the rest of it, identity, are all wrapped up within a context that's been qualitatively transformed. And we don't have any articulation of that by our political or intellectual leadership, or adequate to do that. I'm sorry, but
No, it's good. It's good because what you're doing is you're bringing in different categories, and I think that's why it's important to think outside the box.
Thank you.
Myself, I can't be confined to one thing. That's why if you look at my books.
Yeah, right.
And I wrote a book on education. I wrote a book called Spy in the House of Capitalism, which will be coming out soon.
Was that now? There was
it's a nonfiction, but there's a fictional element as
Yeah,
well.
right, yeah.
I also do some ranting in there.
Good.
There's a psychological element
Thank
to
God
it.
for ranting.
Ranting is necessary. we need ranting. I'm serious.
Rant away,
There's a
rant
place
away.
for ranting today.
Yeah.
And I think so. For me, my interests are drawn to these multiple categories. To the spiritual, to the intellectual, to the cultural. And I think if we can get our thoughts across through media and create a social convergence with this, to get people discussing these ideas, getting a real education, a critical education, those who studied business. Like I said, I only had a minor in business. My major was in English literature.
Yes.
And as I walked by Fordham University, and I remembered my professor Grace, who taught Shakespeare, and Dr. Larry Kramer from Yale University, a PhD from Yale, who's taught psychoanalysis and literature.
Right.
I think psychoanalysis has a place in our society today. I'm reading Lacan now. I'm reading lectures by a French psychoanalyst. He's the most important psychoanalyst since Freud.
Wow,
Jacques
really?
Lacan. He died in 1981. Jacques Lacan, L-A-C-A-n. I'll recommend you a book of his lectures that he gave in 1967 that were very accessible. So I took a class called Psychoanalysis in Literature. So I think literature is very deep, and when you get absorbed into a novel, I'm reading an Edith Wharton novel now called The House of Mirth, which took place in the same time period that my grandmother's benefactor was acting in those plays.
I saw Norman,
the Belle Epoque period.
Norman, who's the famous?
Norman Mailer?
Norman Mailer saying he thought that the best way to get at reality was the novel. You know, it was
Yes.
more relevant than or who's the guy who lived in Italy?
Gore Vidal?
Gore Vidal.
Yeah, yeah,
Gore
yes.
Vidal may have said the same. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
A couple of biggies in terms of writing and fiction. Even fiction can be more illuminating of reality than reality reporting. Is what they were saying.
And that's why the name
It's nuanced. You know.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I have a book I wrote called My Life as a Novel.
Okay, that's good.
That's the next book that's coming out, My Life as a Novel.
Okay.
And the subtitle of that book is Manifesto on the Activist as Hero and Other Ways to Not Be Bored.
That's an interesting title. That sounds like something McLuhan would approve of.
Okay,
or
wow.
Joyce, James
Okay.
Joyce or
Oh,
something. Yeah.
my goodness
Yeah,
gracious.
No, that's good. Again, what's the title?
It's called My Life as a Novel.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interrogating the space between life and art
No, you have
through
a
the
subtitle.
novel.
Yeah.
The subtitle is
My Life as a Novel.
My Life as a Novel is the title. The subtitle is Manifesto on the Activist as Hero.
Activist. That's what I was getting at.
Yes.
Really, the activist.
And Other Ways to Not Be Bored.
In other words, that's great.
Because we're living in a boring society,
yeah.
Harold. We're becoming a
Well,
boring.
I don't find it boring.
Well, it depends.
Well, no, individually you don't.
Well,
find
maybe
it.
because, you know, you and I, we're not bored because we have television shows, we engage in intellectual discourse.
Every day, John comes over the transom, a new, fantastically exciting breakthrough in every damn field, 360 degrees. It's like a quickening. There's
know.
so much interesting stuff.
Yes.
It's a
Yes.
shame that so much of the multimedia capability of reaching out to people is so mundanely trying to sell you something. It's all money. I mean,
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen, he's really good. I've met
love
him a
him.
couple of Yeah, I
Oh,
love him.
yes.
He wrote a song, 57 channels and nothing on. We got 1,998 channels and it's all selling stuff. Or, you know, practically, there's only a couple of channels that are really educational, and the educational communities
yes.
are all wrapped up with the specialization, and they don't want to have anything to do with multimedia because that's for the proletariat. And that's a real shame. The multimedia, public access and multimedia, the Science Channel and the History Channel, they have some really good stuff coming with good scholarship. And it can be contained within a multimedia context, autodidactically put out as a source of education. But it's very, very truncated what's being done in terms of the capability of film and television and cable television and the internet. It's much more capable of producing educationally relevant stuff than anything that has ever been, but the schools are getting in the way. The name of education, partly because the captains of industry who control all the major institutions, they would, when they invaded Africa or something, they would divide and conquer. That's a way to get power.
Yes.
They've divided and conquered the intellectual community. No, wait a minute. I'm
It's
thinking
true.
back
Absolutely.
over. I've been around longer than you, so the university was a little different when I was young and everything. But they're getting down to where they've divided everything up into highly specialized focus. So it used to be there would be some systems thinking or you know, some comprehensive thinking. But now it's all down to where you specialize on something that gives you expertise, because what you're there for is to get a certificate that's going to give you the qualification to qualify for teaching that very highly specialized thing to so that you can make tenure or make peer review and to make money. And they've divided and conquered the intellectual.
Sure.
There's practically no systems thinking going or allowed anywhere where people are thinking about everything, like the grand old guys, Fuller and these kind of people. They used to be thinking comprehensive of system. There's no room for that. That's just jack of all trade, master of none. It can't be relevant unless it's been all the peer reviewed, and the peer review is all geared toward it's all geared around money. I mean, increasingly, the educational process, how to relate to an authority figure. Learn how to relate to an authority figure so you'll be outer directed and susceptible to the propaganda put down by the people who run everything. I mean, that's a suggestion. Public access is a place where you could get, like Mr. Wolf and others, they could come here and they could get an alternative way of doing it. It seems to me like you're trying to work against that trend, if that is the right. I may be jaundiced in my view of education, formal education, but they're falling down on the job in terms of providing vision from philosophy and from a large, comprehensively conceived notion of what's going on in this universe.
Well, let me tell you the title of my book on education, because that's
Okay,
coming out.
good.
That's coming out soon too.
Okay.
And see, I wrote these 5 books over the period of about starting around 2007. I began to get very serious with writing. And each time I wrote a book, it took me about a year, the whole process of writing, revising, and then I would market it. I would try to get an agent and a publisher unsuccessfully. So I accumulated these 5 manuscripts. And it was only a year ago that I discovered how easy it is to self-publish. And I highly advise people, if you have something to say to the public that's valuable, self-publish the book, get it out there, at least gets it into people's hands. It becomes a reality.
And it says you may order this book on Amazon.
On Amazon.
So you can publish it and put it out on Amazon.
Absolutely.
Can you do that kind of self-publishing without going to the peer review people with multimedia? Are we getting to where we can have multimedia done for autodidact purpose, self-educating purpose, and get information around and distribute it around without the gatekeepers of the various canons that let you make money?
Okay, there's a lot I need to say.
Okay.
First, about self-publishing, that if you are a thinker in some specialized area, like a scientist or a sociologist or somebody, and you have come across some amazing breakthrough that will be beneficial to other people in your field, in your area, but won't make a huge splash as far as marketing, right? You're not going to be likely to get a publisher to put that book out, you see?
Yeah, right.
That's why self-publishing has become essential. If you are an innovative thinker and you're coming up with new ideas, you're not going to get a corporate publisher. They're interested in numbers. How many copies are you going to sell? How is this going to enrich our bottom line? Okay.
Yes.
So now we're in an area where
that's the established media. It's
become essential to our survival that radical thinkers, that the visionaries, the Einsteins of our time, the Buckminster Fullers, are not going to get corporate publishers. They're going to have to self-publish. And the same thing goes with public access. Now, if you want to create a better country overnight,
better world
overnight,
universe,
here's my formula as far as public access. Okay?
Thank you.
You look at these television shows that are on at night that are reaching millions of people. You look at the Hannitys and the O'Reillys, and you look at the pure propaganda that's coming out on these mainstream networks. And even if you look at CNBC, which doesn't go far enough, they seem to be tied to the Democratic Party. If you put shows like this show out to reach that kind of audience, and you flipped it around, and you took all of the mainstream and say, okay, you're only going to reach a couple of thousand people, but the Harold Channers are going to reach millions, you would transform the country, because consciousness would start to raise. This is a show, this is a network that values thinking. It slows down the discourse. You and I are having a conversation, a younger man and an older man. You have your background and experiences, I have mine. It's an unscripted dialogue. There's no talking points here. Human consciousness is flowing back and forth, and you don't see this in our mainstream media. Our mainstream media has become so antiseptic and so scripted. I can't even watch it anymore. It becomes so predictable.
They get everything once in a while. You can watch films.
Yeah,
that's got value. You know.
Yes.
Yeah, the thing about Moby Dick the other day was great.
Oh,
but
really?
yeah, but that was that's, or you see some stuff on public television.
I think
that are worthy.
Yes.
Nova and some things like that.
Exactly.
But that's financed there, and everybody's trying to get financed to. Yeah. Anyway, yeah.
They seem to be. They talk too fast. You know. You know who was trying to articulate a critique of this was Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Oh, yeah.
That poor actor who died of a drug overdose.
Sad, yeah.
And here's an example of somebody you think would have every reason to be happy.
Yeah.
He had wealth, he had fame, he was involved in a lot of work that had a lot of integrity to it, so he had a lot of respect. I saw him on a YouTube where he was very critical of the media. And he talked about how meaningless it's become and how you don't know what to believe. And it's become almost like a cliche. Everything that you see on television, it's become so disconnecting. He was articulating that. And I thought to myself, gee, maybe if he had gone into sort of an activist direction to try to change that, maybe that would have given him some hope or kept him alive in some way. I think having projects is what gives you identity, and it brings you a sort of happiness in your life.
Yeah,
Sartre said this. Sartre said, to act is everything. And
That's
this
interesting.
idea of being an activist, it gives you identity because it's a project. Now, I'm a teacher, and as a teacher, I have a project. I get up in front of my students, and I have discourse and dialogue, and I create a learning program. As a writer, I have projects. You have a project. This television show is a project. I think people today don't have projects. They go from work to home. They're always being told what to do. They seem to be in a passive mode. And unless they've been exposed to the arts and creativity, they don't feel that they can be creative. So all that passivity creates unhappiness.
And yet there's just a latent capability that is there. I have great faith in the youth coming along. I can't keep up with them all and everything. They're moving technologically so quick.
Yes.
And I can't help getting over the thing that there is an order to universe, and that we may be coming to that moment of. You referred to the 60s. I've got it sort of pegged in around the year 1970 that there was a qualitative transformation that was being felt, and it was being picked up intuitively and so forth. We called it Woodstock. We called it Vietnam syndrome, anti-Vietnam. We call landing on the moon. All these things going on. There was something going on evolutionarily. That there was something existentially significant in the evolutionary sense. So there's nowhere that seems to be able to come up, that we may be actually coming to the end of a 200,000-year sojourn as Homo sapien on this planet. And we may be opening about a moment of punctuated equilibrium, the first stages of punctuated equilibrium, as when we went from Homo erectus 200,000 years ago, got through the eye of the needle to achieve Homo sapien status in evolutionary terms. 99.9% of all species that have ever existed have gone extinct. We have the ability in our own hands to extinguish our species for the first time in evolutionary history. We may have to think of something equally significant on the material front. We may have transcended scarcity as an ontologic reality. There is enough of knowing and of material goods within an ecological context that is totally unprecedented. We want to get through the eye of the needle to this new way of being in universe. We're a borning. And it never is brought up in those terms. It's always right wing, left wing, new administration, the news, and so forth. But anyway, we're running out of time.
Well, I wanted to say something.
I have to say goodbye.
Oh, really?
We have to say goodbye. Say goodbye. Say goodbye. Say goodbye. Get this guy.
Okay.
Get this guy. Goodbye.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Harold, we got to take the show on the road.
Yeah,
Let's take the show on the road. Come on.
Yeah,
on the road with John and Harold.
Yeah, right.
How about that, Harold? Come on.
Good. Tune in. We're coming back again tomorrow.
Barnstorming the country.
Yeah, right. Barnstorm. Yeah. Let's do a soft shoe now. Right?
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
How about Ain't She Sweet?
Ain't She Sweet?